Alrighty, folks, we're going to talk about the NAR settlement. Again, this is the one that is being proposed. It has not been ratified by the judge yet, but there's a lot of misinformation going on. So I want to talk with somebody I know, trust, and respect to see what he's read, what he thinks, and more importantly, how this might play out, because I think there's just a lot of opinions. We're going to have this conversation with, of course, Coach Carson. How you doing, Chad?
Doing well, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here each week. The audience loves you. Small and mighty investors, one rental at a time. We are the same people, so that is awesome. But yeah, let's talk NAR settlement. It dropped last Friday, caught a lot of people off guard. What have you read? What have you seen? What's going on?
Yeah, so the legal side of things is not my expertise. It's not. I've dug into it a little bit, but I am familiar. As 21 years in the business, I had my real estate license. It's on dormant status, so I don't use it actively. But I get the sense just from the chatter, from the movement, that this is a big shift. I mean, I don't know. We could talk about where exactly this is going, but I think it's a shift in the industry for sure. But as often the kind of my take on big shifts is, I kind of see the opportunity side of it as it, because I've always seen the real estate agent business as a good business model. And I think the shift is going to be how they're paid, how agents have to approach customers. I think for the really competitive agents, it's actually going to be a good thing. I think they'll probably capture market share because I think they're going to innovate. I think there were a lot, let's just call it like it is. There were a lot of lazy business model real estate agents who could benefit from this fact that they could just do what everybody else did. And I saw it behind the scenes. They didn't always add a lot of value. And so I think if you compare the real estate agent business to any other business that has to charge by the fee, CPAs, attorneys, financial planners, I mean, they all thrive and they are lucrative, but they're just going to have to arrange their pitch a little bit differently, basically. And I don't think that's that big a deal.
Yeah, so when we kind of step back, this was basically the suit, as I understand it. I'm not a lawyer. I won't pretend to be one, but I've done a fair amount of reading, right? The suit was essentially sellers saying that NAR had a rule that basically, even though it was always negotiable, basically became this known as 6%, right? 3 to them, 3 to us. And the suit, as it's currently being pitched, really benefits, in my mind, the sellers. Sellers win if the current negotiation is ratified. Okay, so sellers win. How do the sellers win? Sellers are going to be paying less commission. I don't think there's any way around it that when we fast forward a year, sellers that historically average, I think the last thing I read was 5% was the average selling commission. It will go lower. I don't think there's any argument it will go lower. Where it will go doesn't matter, but sellers win. In a housing transaction, there's another party involved, and that is known as the buyer. Dude, I'm not sure buyers win. I can't see almost any goodness for buyers. What do you think?
First time buyers, especially.
Oh,
I think
VA buyers? Oh,
yeah,
my goodness.
and this is the reality is you got to follow the money trail. How do people get paid? And if you're representing a first time buyer, everybody gets paid by the financing. Everybody gets paid because on the closing statement, the purchase price is financed into that buyer's loan, almost 100% in many cases. And so that's where the buyer's agent gets their commission. That's how a first-time buyer who has very little cash is able to pay 3%. Which let's be honest, that when you're a buyer's agent for a first-time buyer, you earn your money because it's usually a little bit lower price than the rest of the market. Yeah. You're holding their hand. You're looking at 20 properties. You're helping them qualify for their loan. I mean, it is a grind. And I think you add a ton of value to your client when you're a first time buyer, but how is that person who doesn't even have enough money for the down payment many times going to pay the buyer's agent, 2 or 3%, which on a $200,000 property, that's $6,000, that's $5,000, even $3,000. Where are they going to come up with that money? I think that maybe there's some legislation changes. Maybe banks will start allowing them to include that. I don't know, but that's a big, I'm with you.
So I talked to a couple of brokers yesterday, and I will continue to have this conversation. As of today, you can't roll commission into a loan. And this really comes out and whacks VA buyers who can't bring anything to the table. How the heck is that going to happen? Right. So that's a real problem. And obviously that gets solved because the sellers, it's a mess. It's a mess for buyers. especially first-time buyers, especially low down payment buyers, because even if it's 1%, you've got to pay. And then let's go to the other side. You and I undoubtedly are comfortable calling listing agents and, historically letting them double end it. But, you know, even, tomorrow I'll be just as comfortable calling listing agents and basically representing myself, right, in the transaction. I don't need the security of having a buyer's agent help with paperwork and inspections and all of that. But that whole dual agency thing, that's also going to be a problem. Like, who are you actually representing? Is it the buyer? Is it the seller? It's just going to be a big mess.
Yeah, you gotta sort out. I mean, when they have an incentive to get paid, and in the past, I always wondered about it too, because the seller is paying both sides of the commissions. The buyer's agent technically represents the buyer. So, I mean, they have a legal contract, but yeah, they're getting paid by the seller selling that property. So there's always a little bit of a mixed incentive. So it's
Sure.
it's a mixed bag. I think if we can solve the problem for the first time buyers, the low money down buyers, I think it's a more aligned arrangement, because you pay for what you get. Like I like the financial planning world where you pay for what you get. You don't pay somebody to manage your assets just by a percentage of the fee. Like I like the fee only, just like I pay my CPA, just like I pay anybody else. You do a service, I'll pay you. If $500 is good for me, if $3,000 is good for me,
Yeah.
awesome. And it's on that service provider to show how much value they can provide. And there
Yeah.
is value there, but the fact that real estate is so financing heavy to me is the biggest
Yeah.
challenge, is that it's a huge transaction, but the banks are paying for it all. So the banks are ultimately gonna have to be the ones, like you said, they don't allow commissions to be financed now, but could that change? Could there be
Oh,
first time home buyer down payment? I think so. I think there's gonna be
oh,
some kind of,
certainly. Certainly. I would almost argue has to change. The only question will be when. The other thing that I think, because when I kind of play this out, you've got to play this out a year or 2 years, right? Because the whole, I do think it's a tectonic shift or change. And anytime there's that kind of massive tsunami or change, all kinds of stuff is going to break and change. So when I look out a year or two, when I think about buyer's agents, I I think there's only two business models. I think there's the high end, full service, whatever that looks like, and that's a healthy fee, 2-3% easy. And then there's the low budget, fixed rate, you know, $500, whatever, just low fixed rate. I mean, I don't see anything in between on the buyer side.
yeah, it reminds me a little bit when you do your taxes. If you have a simple tax transaction, you can go
Mhm.
pay like an H&R Block. They'll do
Yep.
your taxes for a pretty low fee. But if you really have a complex situation, then yeah, you can pay your CPA a few $1,000. They handle it. But some of those, the only difference is that the first time buyer's situation isn't that simple very often. I mean, the financing's pretty tricky. Their inspections are tricky. So yeah, that buyer's agent who should represent that buyer, are they going to do that for $500? And where does that first time buyer left? Like, I think that's still, there's not an incentive there to incentivize that buyer's agent, who I think that person adds a ton of value. But what's the other interesting just question, Michael, is,
Mhm.
real estate investors and us being represented by buyer's agents, we're often kind of like, I don't want to mess with those investors. They're always looking at a bunch of properties. At least early in my career, that was the case. What's it going to look like now when I go to the buyer's agent and say, hey, look, I will pay you a retainer up front just so pay you for some gas, and I'll pay you 2% or 2.5%. Plus I'll pay a bonus if we get a really good deal. Like, think how aligned that is. And are some of
Yeah.
these buyers agents going to be chasing us as investors now that things have shifted a little bit?
It is shocking how similar you and I think. It's just shocking. I actually have a whiteboard right there, and I'm in the process of sketching a video that basically says, I am willing to pay buyer's agents 3% and we'll give a bonus for great deals.
There we
Here's
go.
my buy box,
Yeah.
right? Bring me this stuff. I will pay you.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm even willing for a good one to give them a retainer as long as they're willing to do the work. I think it's shocking how similar we think, because
Hey.
I actually think there's a lot of buyer agents that will work with investors because we'll pay them. We'll just make sure to negotiate the deal that that fee or that dollar amount is, we include it so we can calculate our return. So I think you're right. Again, if you're a buyer's agent in Las Vegas and you want to do some work for me, I'm trying to build my buy box right now. So reach out. Let's try to do this. So I think it's
Beautiful.
exciting.
Beautiful. Well, and I got one related question for you, Michael, thinking about the big picture prices. What does this potentially do to real estate prices? Because that's been the before this all happened,
Yeah.
our price, is there any event that's going to
I do,
cause prices to change?
I have thought about this a lot because I saw like this came out Friday. By Saturday, there were dozens of articles claiming that home prices would fall because of this. And Chad, I can't get there. I've
Yeah.
bought and sold hundreds of homes in the last 25 years. Never once have I talked to a seller or been a seller where I'm like taking anything but the appraised value. I'm not going to lower the price 3% because I'm not buying a buyer's agent or paying a buyer's agent. I want that 3%. We want that money, right? I
Yeah.
want to sell it for current value. Now, could it be a negotiation tactic? Maybe, but it's going to be so at the margin. I just don't know how prices fall. I just don't get it. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. What do you see?
I don't see the A to B to C either.
Yes, like
Although it's just one of those complicated issues, like maybe one thing leads to another. I don't think it's this issue alone, but sometimes it's like the needle, needle that is on the haystack that kind of causes the camel to break his back. But I
yeah,
don't think so either. I'm pretty optimistic that the market is what it is, and if people have jobs, people have income, there's such a pent up demand for people to want to buy houses. It might get more people off the sidelines and say, "Oh, wow, this is something's changing. Let me just see if I can get a deal now." And maybe some sellers offer some incentives. Maybe they offer some more remodeling bonuses. I mean, I think there's some lubrication that could happen because you have this
yeah,
chunk of money that is going to agents. Who's going to lose some of that money? If the agents lose some of the money because the commissions revert to like more common like other countries have and around the world,
sure.
if it goes from 6% to 3 or 4%, that's 2% of whatever the real estate transaction industry is. Where's that money going? It could go to incentives. It could go to the seller. The seller will have more money, and then the seller will have more money to buy the next house.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of complicated effects, but it will be interesting. That's a lot of money when you're talking 1 or 2% of all of the transactions. If that type of thing were to happen to reduce the commissions, then
Mm.
that money's going somewhere and it's going to affect it somehow.
Yeah, the other thing that I am really playing with, and I'd love your feedback on this, is again, it's a tectonic shift where there's suddenly a big chasm. A lot of times technologies dive in to help
Yeah.
solve this. So, whether it's Zillow, Redfin, or, another like company, I think there might be a chance where, again, it's about the buyers. Maybe there's a flat fee service that feeds buyers great properties or whatever, because again, today Zillow basically gets paid by marketing agents. Maybe there's a way to flip it on its head and have buyers sign up for 6 months or something. I don't know. What do you think? There's
Yeah.
some kind of technology coming?
I think the fact I'm thinking about remote work, and
Mhm.
the analogy for me is telemedicine. So if I'm in South Carolina and there's an amazing doctor in Southern California who is willing to sit on their computer, and I get to talk to that person, or vice versa, maybe it's the other way
Sure.
around. So somebody in a low cost of living state is willing to be a telemedicine doctor for somebody in Southern California. That arbitrage between the cost there, I think, is pretty interesting. And if you combine that with tech, what if you had a phone pool of buyers agents who are licensed in a bunch of states, and they can make that smaller flat fee work by like separating all the tasks that a buyer's agent does. So they're not going to hold their hand and go to the house, but do you really need a agent to walk through the house and say, this is the kitchen, this is the bathroom?
Mhm.
Like, really, is that the value add, or is it the fact that they're talking to the other agent and speaking the lingo, and maybe you have an attorney on retainer as well who can be on the call? So maybe you split up the buyer's agent task into multiple remote workers or people who are wherever they are, and then they can then add that at a lower cost because of the remoteness, because of the technology. And so it's basically taking that one task of a buyer's agent, splitting it into multiple tasks,
Yeah.
and then delivering in a different way. I could totally see that happening.
The other thing I was just kind of playing with our idea of you and I willing to pay buyers agents to bring us deal flow. What about a service that basically said to just homeowners, we'll have a sliding scale, kind of like the finance industry, right? The 2 and 20, right? We're going to take some flat fee to help you buy a home. But if we get you a great deal, and again, a great deal can be defined at that point, you owe us a kicker or a whatever. Because
Mm.
right now there's a lot of people just paying list price and there's not really this tug of war with negotiations.
Right.
But if you incent the buyer's agent to actually bust their ass and negotiate,
Yeah.
maybe there's some great way to get great deals. Maybe there's
Uh,
some value.
I think so. Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of when agents had to hustle in the 70s and 80s when
Yeah.
because financing was 17%, they had to
Mhm.
think outside the box to get a transaction done. Sometimes they had to finance their commission. Sometimes
Yep.
they had to participate in the deal. They say, okay, look, my commission's $10,000, but I'll just leave it in the deal to help you with the down payment. You don't have to come up with the cash yet. I mean, there's all sorts of creative ways. We have been a lazy transaction industry for a long time, both as investors and as agents. And I think agents
Yeah.
need to look at their recent history and say, hey, look, there's been a lot of other times where we had to really hustle for our own survival and add
Yep.
value. So I think that's exactly right, especially when you're working with investors where the financing on the back end is a little bit more flexible, where it's not a rigid box you're having to sit in. Investors have cash, they have hard money, they have partners, they have, IRA loans. I mean, there's all sorts of, creative type structures that would allow for more creativity on the transaction, sort of like commercial agents. I think commercial agents are, I'm not a commercial agent. I haven't studied their model, but they often have to hustle to be part of the
Yeah.
deal sometimes, or they even ask to be, hey, look, I want some equity in the deal for me to
Mhm.
bring you this transaction. And that can be totally reasonable in many cases.
I think again, I'm really intrigued by that idea of buyers agents representing buyers for some nominal fee, but then being rewarded for providing a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exciting. I mean, I hadn't thought about that till this conversation.
Yeah.
So that's fun. The other thing I think that's probably going to happen, I'd love your thoughts on, is there will be a lot less agents, licensed agents in a year than today. I don't know what it will be, but this will wash out, quote
Yeah.
unquote, the lazy agents, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. I think there was some fat there, in the industry that was just, like I mentioned earlier, allowed either people who were just, making 3 or 4 transactions as a side hobby, and that was cool. And that's fine. Right. But I think
Mhm.
you have to be all in, be a pro or not be a pro. You're going to have to invest in marketing. You're going to have to invest in your sales presentation. And so I think the pros are the ones who are going to take market share of transactions, because
Mhm.
I don't think it's going to change that the basic service of agents is not needed. Like,
No,
I
of
think
course.
that's there. People, it's a complex transaction. People only do 1 or 2 in their lifetime if they're a homeowner. Like, they need an agent to be with them. The only difference is how you deliver that service, how you get paid. So the smart marketers, the smart business owners, and that's the key word, business owners, not just a little side hobby, are the
Yeah.
ones I think who will take a bunch of share, and it's going to happen fast. I mean, that anytime you have a big shift like this, that's what I'm kind of curious to see, is like, who are
Yeah.
the players who are going to like step up and have this crazy new business model with a bold headline and a bold promise. And it could be the investor agents like that you're talking about. It could be
Could be.
that tech interrupter. And I wouldn't doubt, I'm sure Zillow and these guys have been thinking about this for a
Oh,
long
yeah.
time,
There's
because this
something going on. Yeah.
there's something going on anyway with them. They've always had kind of a partnership with the real estate, the realtors, but they've got their own their own
They
deal
got their
there.
own agenda.
Yeah, so that'll be fun to see how that goes.
Yeah. So, kind of wrapping this up, if you were kind of telling an average homeowner, right, somebody who's only going to do 1 or 2 of these, purchases in their lifetime, what's kind of your message as somebody who's done, hundreds of transactions? What would you tell them the NAR settlement? Is it a nothing burger? Is it something that, changes everything for them? Or what do you tell a home buyer?
I think it can be to your benefit if you're educated about it. If you treat it like Michael and I are talking about treating it, where you see the value in relationships and you incentivize the agent you're working with, then I think this could be a net win for you, because as a seller, you probably can have a little bit more negotiating leverage at this point. You can piece out your commission and say, this is what I'm willing to pay, this is what I'm not. I think you'll have more receptivity. Whereas they in the past, they might have just pushed back and said, no, that's just the way it is. I'd love to do that, but my broker says
Yeah.
I can't do it. But
Right.
now that that's kind of broken. And so as a seller, I think you can negotiate better. As a buyer, as we've talked about, this is going to be the tricky part, is find ways to offer the buyer's agents a good deal, because
Yeah.
if you do that as a buyer, you will get the best buyer's agents. And I wholeheartedly believe there's a ton of value in agents. I've
Yeah.
been one myself on a few transactions, but I've just used agents for a long time as an investor. And someone who knows what I'm doing, I've had hundreds and hundreds of transactions, and I still see the value of
Mhm.
using an agent. For someone who's buying 1 or 2 properties per year, I think there's a ton of value. But now just figure out a different way to negotiate that with them, and you can still benefit from it.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, sellers clearly win. And I think that was the intent of the lawsuit for sure. Buyers, I think it's really up in the air. I do think there's a lot of opportunity. I think if you are savvy and you communicate, there will be opportunities, but there will be less agents, a year from now than today. Coach, if somebody wanted to get one of your amazing books like The Small and Mighty Investor, where do they go and how do they follow you?
You can find it on Amazon. It's on Audible as well. If you like to listen to books, Bigger Pockets has it. And if you want to listen to me, I have a podcast every Monday, several of which coming out, by the way, Michael, are from the One Rental at a Time event. Those are starting to roll out. So those are
Very
great
cool.
episodes. They're getting a lot of good reception from everybody in my audience. So check out my podcast. Just search for Coach Carson on YouTube, on any podcast platform, and you'll find me there.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Michael.